The silence at Martha's saloon shattered like glass when Sophia Fields walked in. It was the summer of 1876, and Redemption Creek, Wyoming was no place for a woman alone, especially a woman with a secret. Her eyes were fixed on the floorboards, her hands trembling as she clutched a crumpled piece of paper. This was it, her last hope. She needed a job, any job, or she'd be out on the street by nightfall. She approached the bar, the smell of cheap whiskey and unwashed bodies hitting her like a physical blow. Laughter echoed off the walls. But the moment the patrons realized she wasn't going to speak, the laughter changed. It became cruel, sharp, pointed right at her. "Cat got your tongue, missy," a miner yelled, his words slurring together. He slapped his knee, roaring with delight. "Martha don't hire mutes." Sophia's cheeks burned hot with shame. She wanted to disappear, but she had nowhere to go. With a shaking hand, she slid the folded note across the scarred wooden counter. Martha Hillman, the saloon's owner, was a mountain of a woman with hands like sledgehammers. She snatched the note, her eyes narrowing as she read the tidy script. The note explained everything. The scarlet fever 3 years ago, the voice that had vanished, her desperate need for work as a cleaner. Anything. Martha looked up, her voice booming across the room. "You ain't never gonna speak? Not a single word?" The whole saloon went quiet, waiting. Sophia could only shake her head, a curtain of auburn hair falling across her face. It was her only shield. "Well, I got no use for someone who can't holler when there's trouble," Martha declared, shoving the note back at her. The rejection was a punch to the gut. The saloon erupted. Men howled with laughter, one of them puffing out his cheeks and opening and closing his mouth like a dying fish. Sophia stood frozen, a statue of humiliation. Her journey had ended here, in a chorus of mockery. And that's when she saw him. He was a tall shadow in a dark corner of the room, and he wasn't laughing. He was watching her. His face was weathered by the sun, his eyes a startling, piercing blue. This was Isaac Young. And in a town where every man was loud, his silence was the loudest thing in the room. He didn't join the jeering. He just watched, his expression unreadable, an interest in his eyes that wasn't ridicule. It was something else entirely. As the most respected rancher in the territory, his quiet disapproval had an effect. The laughter closest to him began to die down, the men shifting uncomfortably under his gaze. Then Isaac stood up. The soft jingle of his spurs was the only sound in the sudden hush. He crossed the room, every eye following him. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. He walked to his table, pulled out an empty chair, and simply gestured for Sophia to join him. The invitation was as clear as a gunshot in the night. Sophia hesitated, her heart hammered against her ribs. In 20 years, she'd learned that kindness from a stranger, especially a man, always had a price. And since the fever had stolen her voice, the price had only gotten higher. But night was coming on fast, and the street outside was even colder than the stairs inside. She took a breath and walked to his table, perching on the edge of the chair like a frightened bird ready to take flight. They sat there for what felt like an eternity. The saloon slowly came back to life around them, but their table was an island of silence. Isaac didn't try to make her talk. He didn't stare. He didn't treat her like a freak. He just nursed his whiskey, a silent guardian in the middle of a storm. When Martha brought him a plate of stew, he simply pointed to Sophia and held up 2 fingers. A second plate appeared in front of her. Her stomach betrayed her with a loud growl. For the first time, the corner of Isaac's mouth twitched, the ghost of a smile. He saw her, but he wasn't judging her. After she had devoured every last bite, he slid a small, leather-bound notebook and a pencil across the table. It was an offering, a bridge. Sophia stared at it. Then, slowly, her fingers trembling, she picked up the pencil. "I'm Isaac Young," he said. His voice was deep, like distant thunder. I own the Double Circle Ranch, she wrote, her handwriting surprisingly steady. Sophia Fields. Thank you. He nodded, reading the words. Folks around here can be hard, he said, his eyes meeting hers. They fear what's different. She paused, then wrote the words that had been strangling her for weeks. I need work. Anywhere. Isaac stroked his clean-shaven jaw, his gaze thoughtful. My housekeeper, Mrs. Peterson, she's been saying she needs help. The ranch is growing. His eyes held hers. Would that interest you? A flicker of hope, bright and painful, ignited in Sophia's chest. She wrote so fast the pencil lead almost snapped. Yes, I'm a hard worker. When? Tomorrow, he said, standing up. I'll get you a room at the boarding house for tonight. As they walked toward the door, Martha's voice cut through the noise again. Taking in strays now, Isaac? Isaac paused, his hand resting lightly on the small of Sophia's back, a simple gesture of protection that sent a shockwave through her. Miss Fields is the new assistant at the Double Circle, Martha, he said, his voice hard as iron. I expect she'll be treated with respect. The saloon was silent once more. Outside, in the cool night air, Sophia gently touched his arm. He turned, his face shadowed by his hat. She couldn't speak, but she could smile. And for the first time in 3 years, it was a real smile, a genuine, grateful smile that lit up her entire face. Something in Isaac's expression shifted then, something guarded and deep. He wasn't just being kind, he wasn't just offering a job. He was looking at her like he'd found something he hadn't even realized he was looking for. And that was far more dangerous than any mockery. The Double Circle Ranch was a world away from the dusty streets of Redemption Creek. As dawn broke, painting the mountains in strokes of pink and gold, Sophia stood on the porch of the main house and felt like she could finally breathe. The ranch was vast, a kingdom of rolling pastures, grazing cattle, and the constant, steady rhythm of work. Isaac's housekeeper, Mrs. Peterson, was a woman carved from the same tough Wyoming landscape, silver-haired and no-nonsense, but with kind eyes that missed nothing. Don't you worry about not speaking, she'd said the night before, her hand warm on Sophia's. Actions speak louder than words anyway. Always have. In the kitchen, helping prepare a mountain of food for the ranch hands, Sophia caught glimpses of Isaac through the window. He moved with a quiet authority, a man completely in his element. He was the undisputed king of this domain. A few times his gaze drifted to the house, and once his eyes met hers. He gave a slight tip of his hat before turning away. Sophia felt a blush creep up her neck. He's a good man, Mr. Young, Mrs. Peterson said, not missing the exchange. Lost his wife and baby son to cholera 5 years back. Buried himself in this ranch ever since. He works harder than any man I've ever known. Sophia nodded, her hands kneading dough. She understood that kind of grief, the kind that swallows your words and leaves you with nothing but work. A kinship. That's what she felt. A dangerous, foolish kinship. Over the next few weeks, Sophia fell into the rhythm of the ranch. She worked until her muscles screamed, finding a strange comfort in the exhaustion. It left no room for thinking, no room for remembering. The small room at the back of the house was the first place that had ever felt like hers. Isaac kept his distance. He was her employer, nothing more. He treated her with a formal respect that was almost colder than the mockery in the saloon. But she would feel his eyes on her. When she was hanging laundry, she'd feel a prickle on the back of her neck and turn to see him watching from the corral before he'd quickly look away. It wasn't pity. It wasn't even curiosity. It was something else, an intensity that made her heart beat a little too fast. One Sunday, the ranch was quiet. The hands were in town, and Mrs. Peterson was visiting her sister. Sophia was alone in the kitchen, surrounded by the sweet, bubbling scent of berry preserves. She was so lost in her work, she didn't hear him come in. Mind if I join you? Isaac's voice was soft, but it made her jump. He stood in the doorway of his own kitchen, looking strangely out of place, holding his hat in his hands like a nervous boy. She smiled and gestured to a chair. He sat, watching her work. The silence stretched, but it wasn't uncomfortable. My mother used to make preserves, he said finally. The whole house smelled like this for days. Sophia reached for her ever-present notebook. My grandmother taught me. She said good preserves need patience. Isaac actually smiled, a full, genuine smile that transformed his stern face. Your grandmother sounds wise. She felt bold. She had to know. You have patience. You sat with me in the saloon. Why? The question hung in the air between them. Why would the most powerful man in the valley take an interest in a broken, silent girl? He turned his hat over and over in his hands. I saw something, he said, his voice low. Not weakness, strength. This country breaks a lot of people, Miss Fields. But you weren't broken, just quiet. Their eyes met and the air crackled. It was too much. She quickly turned back to her berries, her heart fluttering like a trapped bird. But Isaac didn't leave. After a moment, he stood. I have some books in my study. My late wife, she enjoyed reading. Perhaps you'd like to borrow one. Sophia's love for books was one of the few things the fever hadn't taken. She nodded eagerly. His study was a sanctuary of leather and wood, smelling of old paper and pipe smoke. But as he pulled a book from the shelf, his hand brushed against hers. The touch was electric, a simple, fleeting contact that sent a jolt straight through her. She flinched back, her breath catching in her throat. Isaac saw it. His expression shuttered. I'm sorry, he said, his voice suddenly formal again. I didn't mean to. She shook her head, fumbling for her notebook. You didn't. It's been a long time. His face softened. You are a normal person, Sophia. Some people just don't know how to listen. No one had ever said that to her before. No one. A wave of emotion washed over her, so powerful it brought tears to her eyes. On pure impulse, she reached out and squeezed his hand. A silent thank you. And that was the moment everything tilted. The professional distance between them dissolved, replaced by something fragile and new. But as she looked around the study, at the books his dead wife had loved, a cold knot of dread formed in her stomach. He wasn't seeing her. He was seeing a ghost, and she was just a convenient, silent replacement. Their evenings fell into a new pattern. After the work was done, they'd sit on the porch swing, the sky bleeding purple and orange. Sometimes he'd talk about the ranch, his voice a low rumble in the twilight. Other times they'd sit in a comfortable silence, a silence Sophia was starting to prefer over the meaningless chatter of the world she'd left behind. He started teaching her to ride. He was a patient teacher, his hands gentle but firm as he guided her. She took to it instantly. The feeling of freedom on horseback was intoxicating. It was a voice she didn't need vocal cords for. Soon they were spending every Sunday afternoon exploring the vast lands of the Double Circle. He showed her hidden streams and meadows bursting with wildflowers. He told her stories of building the ranch from nothing, of the back-breaking work and the lonely years. But he never spoke of his wife. Not again. One afternoon they rode to a high bluff overlooking the entire valley. The world stretched out below them, a patchwork of green and gold. They sat on a blanket under a lone cottonwood tree, the silence broken only by the whisper of the wind. Sophia knew she was crossing a line, but she had to ask. She wrote in her notebook, "Tell me about her. Your wife." Isaac went still. He stared out at the horizon for so long, she was sure he was angry, that she had shattered the fragile peace between them. Her name was Elizabeth, he said finally, his voice rough. She was a schoolteacher from back in Missouri. She loved books, and she hated the silence out here. He paused, picking at a loose thread on the blanket. She said the quiet was deafening. Sophia's heart clenched. He continued, his voice barely a whisper. Our son, James, he was only 6 months old. The cholera took them both in less than a week. He finally looked at her, and his eyes were filled with a pain so raw it stole her breath. For 2 years after, I barely spoke a word myself. The whole town called me the Silent Rancher. She didn't know what to do. She couldn't offer words of comfort. So she just placed her hand over his. He flinched, but then he turned his hand over and laced his fingers with hers. It was an anchor, for both of them. Maybe that's why I understood, he said, his thumb stroking the back of her hand. That first night in the saloon, I recognized someone else who was drowning in the quiet. Now it was her turn. Her secret. The fever damaged my vocal cords. That's what the doctor said. She hesitated, then wrote the truth she'd never told anyone. But sometimes I think my voice left because I had nothing left to say. He read the words, his blue eyes searching hers. And now, Sophia? Do you have things worth saying now? Her hand trembled as she wrote. Yes, but I'm afraid. Afraid of what? He asked, his voice gentle. Of hoping. Of believing I could ever be normal. With someone who sees me, not just... The silence. Isaac's grip on her hand tightened. I see you, Sophia Fields, he said, his voice thick with emotion. I've seen you from the very beginning. He leaned in slowly, giving her every chance to pull away. She didn't. She met him halfway. The kiss was hesitant at first, then deepened into something that spoke of shared loneliness and a desperate, burgeoning hope. It was a promise made without a single word. When they rode back to the ranch, the world had shifted on its axis. Mrs. Peterson took one look at them and gave a small, knowing smile. But Sophia's newfound happiness was a fragile thing. As she lay in bed that night, a terrible thought crept in. Elizabeth had hated the silence. And now Isaac was falling for a woman who was the personification of it. Was this love? Or was it just a way for him to finally control the quiet that had terrified his first wife? The thought was a shard of ice in her heart. 2 weeks later, everything came crashing down. Sophia was in Redemption Creek, picking up supplies at the general store. She was just about to leave when a voice from her past snaked through the air, making her blood run cold. Well, well, if it ain't the little mute mouse who ran away. She turned, her heart stopping in her chest. Vernon Mathers, a man from her hometown, a man whose smug face was tied to her darkest memories. He wasn't just a bully. He was the reason she'd run. He stood on the boardwalk, flanked by 2 other men, a predatory grin spreading across his face. Your pa's been looking everywhere for you, Sophia. Offered a mighty fine reward, too. He started towards her, his eyes crawling over her. But maybe you and me, we can work out a different kind of reward. Sophia backed away, clutching her bag of flour like a shield. Vernon had always been trouble, his entitlement, his wandering hands. After she'd lost her voice, he'd become a monster, his taunts turning vicious. Still won't talk, huh? He lunged, his hand clamping around her arm like a vice. Doesn't matter. You don't need to talk for what I've got in mind. Before she could even struggle, another voice cut through the air, sharp and deadly as a razor. Take your hand off her. Isaac. He stood 10 feet away, his body deceptively relaxed, but his eyes were chips of blue ice. There was a coiled stillness about him she'd never seen before, the calm before a lightning strike. Vernon's friends took a nervous step back. They recognized the look of a man who had been pushed too far. This ain't your business, young, Vernon sneered, though his grip loosened slightly. This here is family business. Her pa wants her back. Miss Fields works for me, Isaac said, his voice dangerously low as he closed the distance between them. And she doesn't belong to anyone. Vernon laughed, a nasty grating sound. "She's damaged goods. Can't even scream for help." "What good is a woman like that?" Isaac moved. It wasn't a punch. It was a blur of motion. One second Vernon was standing there. The next he was slammed against the wall of the general store. Isaac's forearm pressed hard against his throat, lifting him off his feet. The two other men froze, their faces pale. The street went silent. "You say one more word about her," Isaac hissed, his voice a terrifying whisper, "and I'll show you what a man can do without making a sound." Terror bloomed in Vernon's eyes. He clawed at Isaac's arm, making gagging sounds. Isaac held him there for a long moment, letting the entire town see, then dropped him. Vernon collapsed in a heap, coughing and sputtering. He scrambled away, his friends helping him up. "This ain't over," he choked out, stumbling backward down the street. "Her pa will pay to get her back where she belongs." Isaac ignored him. He turned to Sophia, the chilling rage in his eyes melting away, replaced by a fierce concern. "Are you all right?" She could only nod, her entire body shaking uncontrollably. But as he gently led her away, she wasn't just scared of Vernon. She was scared of Isaac. The violence in him, the sheer, cold fury. It hadn't just been about protecting her. It felt personal. It felt like Vernon Mathers wasn't just a stranger to him. And that night, back at the ranch, as she wrote down the story of her tyrannical father and the arranged marriage she'd fled, she left one crucial detail out. The real reason she ran. The real reason Vernon was hunting her. Because if Isaac knew the whole truth, he wouldn't just be angry. He might be implicated. His words proved prophetic. Just 3 days later, they came. A wagon rattled up the long drive to the ranch house during supper. It was Vernon, and next to him, a grim-faced man with cold, dead eyes. Her father, Harold Fields. But they weren't alone. Riding alongside them was the county sheriff. The law was on their side. Isaac met them on the porch, positioning himself squarely in front of the door. The sheriff, a man named Davis, looked deeply uncomfortable. "Mr. Young," he began, avoiding Isaac's gaze, "Mr. Fields here has filed a complaint. Says his daughter is unwell, mentally, that you've taken advantage of her condition." Sophia appeared in the doorway behind Isaac, her face as white as a sheet, but her spine rigid. "There she is," her father exclaimed, his voice slick with false concern. "Sophia, child, come on now. It's time to come home." "She is home," Isaac said, his voice flat and hard. "Miss Fields is 20 years old, Sheriff. She's an employee here of her own free will. She is perfectly sound of mind." "She needs protection," Harold insisted, his eyes flashing. "A mute woman is vulnerable, especially around a man like you, living all alone out here." The insinuation hung in the air, vile and poisonous. Isaac's jaw tightened, a muscle jumping in his cheek. But before he could speak, Sophia stepped forward. She had been preparing for this. After Vernon's appearance, she had spent an entire night writing. She handed a sealed letter to Sheriff Davis. He opened it, his eyebrows shooting up as he read. He cleared his throat. "Mr. Fields," he said, the paper rattling in his hand, "your daughter alleges here that you attempted to force her into a marriage with a man 3 times her age. She also alleges physical abuse when she refused." Harold's face turned a blotchy red. "Lies. She's always been a liar. The sickness made her mind unstable." "I've seen no evidence of that," Isaac countered, his voice like stone. "She's the steadiest person I know." The sheriff looked caught in the middle. He was a man who followed the path of least resistance, and Harold Fields was making a lot of noise. It looked like he was about to side with her father. But then the screen door creaked open and Mrs. Peterson stepped onto the porch, wiping her hands on her apron. Her kind face was set like granite. "Sheriff Davis," she said, her voice ringing with authority. "I've known you since you were in diapers, And you know I don't suffer fools. I've been with this girl day in and day out for months. She's as sane as I am. Maybe saner." She then fixed her sharp eyes on Harold. "And I know a controlling bully when I see one. You smell just like my first husband." That seemed to be enough. The sheriff sighed, defeated. "Mr. Fields, I can't force a grown woman to go with you against her will. The law is the law." Harold's face twisted into a mask of pure hatred. He pointed a trembling finger at Sophia. "This isn't over," he snarled, his voice low and venomous. "You've shamed this family. No decent man will ever have you. You'll die alone." As they rode away, a cloud of dust and hatred in their wake, Sophia's strength finally crumbled. A violent tremor racked her body. Isaac gathered her in his arms, leading her to the porch swing as silent, wrenching sobs shook her frame. "He can't hurt you any more," Isaac murmured into her hair. "I promise. I will never let him hurt you." But as she cried in his arms, she knew it was a lie. Her father never made idle threats. He wouldn't just leave. He would come back, and he would burn everything she loved to the ground. That night, sleep was impossible. She sat at her small desk, watching the moonlit plains, a sense of dread coiling in her gut. Isaac thought the fight was over. She knew it had just begun. And then she saw it. A tiny flickering orange light, far out by the northern pastures. It flared, then another, and another. It wasn't a campfire. It was fire, and it was spreading. The fire was a distraction. She knew it in her bones. As the ranch hands shouted and scrambled for buckets, as Isaac barked orders, his face grim in the hellish orange glow, Sophia's eyes were locked on the dark, empty space where the main house stood. They weren't just trying to destroy his livelihood. They were trying to draw him away. They were coming for her. She ran inside, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She had to warn him. She grabbed her notebook, her hands shaking so badly she could barely write. "It's a trick. They're here." But when she ran back outside, Isaac was gone, already riding hard towards the flames with the other men. She was alone. A floorboard creaked upstairs. She wasn't alone. Terror, cold and absolute, seized her. She backed away from the staircase, her eyes wide in the flickering light from the distant fire. A shadow detached itself from the top of the stairs. Vernon Mathers. He held a length of rope in his hands, that same predatory grin on his face. "Pa's keeping your new man busy," he whispered, his voice slithering through the quiet house. "Gives us some time to get reacquainted." Then another figure appeared behind him. Her father. His face was no longer filled with rage. It was chillingly calm. "You should have come home, Sophia," he said, his voice devoid of all emotion. "You've brought this on yourself." She backed away, her mind racing. The kitchen. There was a heavy iron skillet on the stove, a knife block, but they were between her and the door. She was trapped. Vernon started down the stairs, coiling the rope. "We're just gonna take you home. Pa will help you see reason." But she saw the look in his eyes. They weren't taking her home. They were going to make her disappear. Out on the plains, Isaac reined in his horse, a sudden terrible feeling washing over him. The fire was spreading too fast in too many places at once. It was deliberate. And Sophia, he'd left her alone. He wheeled his horse around, digging his heels in, praying he wasn't too late. He galloped back towards the house, the silhouette of it dark against the fiery sky. Inside, Sophia scrambled backwards, knocking over a small table. A book fell to the floor. It was the book of poetry Isaac had given her, his late wife's favorite. Her father's eyes landed on it. A cruel smile touched his lips. "Trying to replace her. A broken thing like you." He kicked the book across the floor. "You were always a disappointment. But your silence, that was your biggest failure." And then he said the words that unlocked the deepest, most terrifying secret in her soul. You should have kept your mouth shut about the Landry's silver, too, just like I told you to. The memory hit her like a physical blow. It wasn't scarlet fever. It was never scarlet fever. She was 12 years old, hidden in the hayloft. She saw her father and a younger Vernon Mathers dragging stolen goods from their neighbor's farm. They saw her. Later that night, her father had come to her room. He'd told her that if she ever spoke a single word of what she saw, he would do something terrible to her. To prove his point, he'd backhanded her so hard her world went black. When she woke up, her throat was raw from screaming. The doctor called it a hysterical reaction to the fever she'd had the week before. Her voice was gone. She hadn't lost her voice. She had buried it. It was a tomb for a secret, a self-imposed prison to stay alive. Vernon was at the bottom of the stairs now. "No more running," he said, taking a step towards her. Sophia's back hit the wall. There was nowhere left to go. Her father watched from the stairs, his arms crossed, a spectator at his own daughter's destruction. The front door burst open, splintering off its hinges. Isaac stood there, his face a mask of fury, his chest heaving. He'd seen the two horses tied loosely behind the woodpile. He knew. "Get away from her," he growled. Her father just laughed. "You're too late, young. She belongs to me." Vernon lunged for Sophia. Time seemed to slow down. She saw Isaac starting to move, but he was too far away. She saw Vernon's hands reaching for her. She saw her father's cold, triumphant face, and something inside her broke. The tomb cracked open. A sound ripped from her throat, raw and ragged from years of disuse. It wasn't a word. It was a scream. A primal, agonized sound filled with all the terror and rage she had swallowed for years. It was the loudest sound in the world. The scream stunned everyone into silence. Vernon froze, his hands inches from her. Her father's smug expression vanished, replaced by shock. Even Isaac stopped in the doorway, his eyes wide. It was just a moment, but it was enough. Sophia didn't think. She acted. She grabbed the heavy oil lamp from the table beside her and swung it with all her might. The glass shattered against the side of Vernon's head. He staggered back with a cry of pain, hot oil splashing across his face and shirt. Her father, recovering from the shock, lunged down the stairs. But the scream had broken his control over her. The fear was still there, but it was now mixed with a white-hot fury. She was no longer a silent victim. Isaac charged into the room, tackling her father and sending them both crashing into the far wall. The two men grappled on the floor, a chaotic explosion of grunts and fists. Vernon, clutching his head, his shirt now smoldering where the oil had soaked it, turned his rage on Sophia. He backhanded her, sending her sprawling to the floor. "You stupid!" His words were cut off as a tiny flicker of flame ignited on his chest. The spilled lamp oil. He looked down in horror as the flame blossomed, crawling up his shirt. He started screaming, a high, panicked sound, beating at the flames with his hands. The distraction gave Isaac the opening he needed. He landed a solid punch on Harold's jaw, dazing him. He scrambled to his feet and kicked the rope away from Vernon, who was now fully engulfed in flames and running blindly for the door. He burst out into the night, a human torch, his screams fading as he collapsed in the yard. The room was thick with the smell of smoke and burnt cloth. Her father, dazed and bleeding from his lip, stared at the empty doorway, then at Sophia, who was slowly getting to her feet. The hatred in his eyes was absolute. He pulled a small, wicked-looking knife from his boot. "I should have finished this years ago," he snarled, advancing on her. Isaac was about to intervene, but Sophia held up a hand, stopping him. This was her fight. Her eyes never left her father's. She opened her mouth, and this time a word came out. Raspy, broken, but clear. No, it was the first word she had spoken to him since she was 12 years old. It hit him harder than any punch. He faltered, his eyes wide with disbelief. No more, she whispered, her voice gaining a tiny bit of strength. You don't control me. He stared at her, his mind unable to process the sound of her voice, the defiance in her eyes. In that moment of hesitation, Sheriff Davis appeared in the shattered doorway, his gun drawn, flanked by two ranch hands. The commotion and the screaming man on fire had drawn them from the blaze. "Drop it, Harold," the sheriff said, his voice grim. The fight was over. Her father looked from the gun to Isaac, to his daughter, the daughter who had found her voice. The source of his power over her was gone, burned away in a single desperate night. The knife clattered to the floor. As the sheriff led him away in cuffs, Harold Fields looked like what he was, a small, pathetic man whose reign of terror had finally ended. Sophia stood shaking in the middle of the room, the adrenaline fading, leaving a deep, bone-aching exhaustion. Isaac crossed the room in 2 strides and gently pulled her into his arms. She buried her face in his chest, and for the first time in years, she cried, not in silence, but with audible, wrenching sobs. He just held her, stroking her hair. "I see you, Sophia," he murmured against her hair, his own voice thick with emotion. "I hear you." The fire in the fields was eventually put out, leaving behind blackened scars on the land. The ranch was damaged, but it would heal. Just like her. In the aftermath, the truth came out, the whole ugly story. Sophia, with her notebook and her newfound fragile voice, told Sheriff Davis everything. About the stolen silver, the threats, the years of silent fear. Mrs. Peterson, it turned in, had suspected something was amiss all along and had written to a friend in Sophia's hometown, confirming Harold Fields was a man deep in gambling debt with a reputation for cruelty. Vernon Mathers survived but was horribly burned and disfigured. He and Harold Fields were sent to the territorial prison, their reign of terror finally over. Redemption Creek was never the same. The story of the silent girl who screamed spread like wildfire. She was no longer an object of pity or scorn. She was a legend, a survivor. One evening, a week after the fire, Isaac found her on the porch swing, watching the sunset paint bruises on the sky. He sat down beside her, not speaking for a long time. The house was quiet behind them, the smell of charred grass still hanging in the air. "We'll have to rebuild the north fence," he said finally, "and reseed the pasture." She nodded, looking out at the damaged land. She picked up her notebook, which she still kept close, out of habit. "It's a lot of work." "I'm not afraid of work," he said, turning to face her. "Are you?" She looked at him, at his kind, steady eyes. She shook her head. He took her hand, his calloused thumb tracing circles on her palm. "Sophia," he began, his voice serious. "What happened? It changed everything." A knot of fear tightened in her chest. Was he going to send her away? Was her broken voice, her broken past, too much? "I don't want a housekeeper," he said quietly. She looked down, her heart sinking. She knew it. "And I don't want an assistant." He gently lifted her chin, forcing her to look at him. "I want a partner, an equal. I want to rebuild this ranch and my life with you." He took a deep breath. "I want you to be my wife, Sophia, if you'll have me." Tears welled in her eyes, but they were not tears of sadness. She thought of all the words she wanted to say, the lifetime of gratitude and love she felt for this man. But she didn't need a notebook. Not anymore. She leaned in, kissed him softly, and then pulled back, meeting his hopeful gaze. She took a breath, concentrating, forcing the sound from her raw throat. It came out as a hoarse whisper, but it was the most beautiful sound he had ever heard. Yes. The wedding was a small affair, held right there on the porch of the ranch house, overlooking the healing land. The whole town came, not out of curiosity this time, but out of respect. Martha, the saloon owner, brought a cask of her best whiskey. Mrs. Peterson baked a cake that could have fed an army. When the minister asked if she took this man to be her husband, Sophia looked at Isaac, her eyes shining. She didn't whisper. She didn't hesitate. Her voice was still rough, like stones rubbing together, but it was clear and steady. "I do." A cheer went up from the assembled crowd. Isaac's eyes filled with tears as he slid a simple gold band onto her finger. He hadn't just saved her. She had saved him too. She had broken the silence that had imprisoned them both. Life on the double circle found a new rhythm, a rhythm of healing and rebuilding. Sophia's voice slowly grew stronger. It would never be a clear, ringing thing. It would always carry the faint, raspy scars of its long burial. She spoke sparingly, choosing her words with care, making each one count. Her silence had taught her the weight of language. She and Isaac communicated in a language all their own, a mix of spoken words, written notes, and the deep, unspoken understanding that had been there from the start. The ranch thrived. Under their joint care, it became more prosperous than ever. Sophia planted a sprawling garden, its vibrant colors a testament to the new life she was building. The main house, once a place of quiet grief, was now filled with warmth and the occasional soft sound of her laughter. 1 year to the day after their wedding, they were sitting on the porch swing, watching the last rays of sunlight fade from the sky. The land was green again. The scars had faded. Sophia took Isaac's hand and placed it on her gently rounded stomach. His eyes widened. A slow, incredulous smile spread across his face. "Really?" he whispered, his voice choked with emotion. She nodded, her own smile radiant. She leaned close to him, and her whispered words were for him alone. "Our family grows." He pulled her into his arms, his heart so full he couldn't speak. They had both known such profound loss, such deep and suffocating silence. But here, together, they had found a love that didn't need loud declarations. It was a love built on patience, on listening, and on the quiet courage to start over. The following spring, the double circle welcomed a daughter. She had her mother's auburn hair and her father's piercing blue eyes. They named her Hope, because that's what she was, a promise that even after the longest, darkest silence, life could find its voice again. Travelers passing through Redemption Creek would often hear the story, the legend of the silent woman and the patient rancher. They'd say he gave her a safe harbor, and she gave him back his heart. They'd say that together, they proved that the most important things in life aren't always said out loud. Sometimes they're just understood. And if you enjoyed this story of a love that was stronger than silence, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next one.